Private Riley Chen stared at his reflection in the polished chrome surface of the Harmony's Edge's mess hall table and wondered, not for the first time, how his life had taken such a spectacularly wrong turn. 3 months ago, he'd been cramming for organic chemistry finals at State University, surviving on energy drinks and the naive hope that his scholarship would carry him through medical school. Now he was hurtling through hyperspace toward an alien homeworld, armed with nothing more than basic military training and what his drill sergeant had charitably called an unfortunate tendency to ask the wrong questions at exactly the right time. Chen, Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the ambient hum of the ship's engines like a plasma cutter through butter. Stop making love to your reflection and get over here. Riley scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over the magnetic boots that still felt foreign after 3 weeks of space travel. The artificial gravity on the ship operated on what the engineers called selective principles, which apparently meant it worked perfectly everywhere except when you really needed it to. Sir, I wasn't. Son, I've seen cadets stare at mirrors with less longing than you just showed that table. Morrison's weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile if it weren't attached to a man who'd spent 30 years convincing hostile aliens not to vaporize humanity. Nervous, Riley considered lying, then remembered that the colonel had sensors embedded in his cybernetic eye that could probably detect a fib from 3 star systems away. Terrified, sir, but in a very professional, military-appropriate way. That good means your brain's working. Morrison pulled up a holographic display that showed their destination, Zerion Prime, a world that looked like someone had taken Earth and dipped it in liquid starlight. What do you know about the Valdorians? They're humanoid, technologically advanced, and possess the uncomfortable ability to reduce entire battle fleets to their component atoms using what our xenobiologists call aggressive matter reorganization, Riley recited, pleased that he'd managed to remember something from the briefings that wasn't related to proper bathroom etiquette in zero-G environments. And Riley's brain scrambled for additional facts that didn't involve plumbing. They've been watching us for approximately 50 years, during which time humanity has managed to achieve faster-than-light travel, cure 17 major diseases, and invent a breakfast cereal that somehow tastes worse than the military rations from the 21st century. Morrison's eyebrow twitched, which Riley had learned was the equivalent of roaring laughter from the stoic colonel. What else? They communicate through a combination of verbal language and what the linguistics team calls harmonic resonance patterns, which sounds very impressive until you realize it means they hum while they talk. Riley paused, then added, also, their ears are pointy, which apparently makes them excellent at hearing diplomatic lies but terrible at wearing standard-issue human headphones. Christ, Chen, you sound like you're describing a nature documentary. Morrison waved his hand, and the hologram zoomed in on the massive orbital station orbiting Zerion Prime. The structure defied several laws of physics that Riley was reasonably certain still applied in this part of the galaxy. This is the Royal Palace. Queen Zephyra has agreed to meet with our delegation after 3 years of what Ambassador Harrison insists on calling constructive border negotiations, but which the rest of us recognize as politely threatening each other with extinction. Riley studied the palace, noting how it seemed to breathe and pulse with internal light. Sir, why exactly am I here? I mean, I understand the diplomatic corps, the xenobiologists, the military advisors, but I'm pretty sure my qualifications stop at can operate a mop without causing international incidents. You ever hear of the butterfly effect, son? Small changes can have large consequences, sir. Though I'm reasonably certain butterflies went extinct around the same time, we figured out how to make coffee in space without it tasting like recycled coolant. Morrison's other eyebrow joined the first one somewhere near his hairline. The point, Chen, is that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody expects to matter. Queen Zephyra requested that our delegation include representatives from all levels of human society. Apparently, she finds our social hierarchies fascinatingly chaotic. So I'm here as an example of fascinating chaos. You're here because you ask questions nobody else thinks to ask. You see things from angles that would give career diplomats vertigo, and according to your psychological profile, you possess what Dr. Patricia Williams described as an almost supernatural ability to find humor in situations that should rightfully cause nervous breakdowns. Riley considered this. That sounds like a polite way of saying I'm too stupid to be properly terrified. That's one interpretation. Morrison shut down the hologram and fixed Riley with a look that had probably convinced several alien species to reconsider their hostile intentions. Here's another. You're genuine. No political agenda, no career ambitions beyond not getting court-martialed, no hidden motives. In a room full of people trying to manipulate each other, genuine stands out. The ship's intercom crackled to life with the voice of Captain Rodriguez. All personnel, prepare for transition to real space in T-minus 60 seconds. Diplomatic team to stations. Riley felt his stomach attempt to relocate somewhere near his esophagus as the ship's hyperspace engines began their shutdown sequence. The sensation always reminded him of being turned inside out while riding a roller coaster made of pure mathematics. "Remember, son," Morrison said, steadying himself against a bulkhead as spacetime reasserted its traditional properties around them. "When we get down there, just be yourself. Ask your questions, make your observations, and try not to accidentally declare war on anyone." "What are the odds of me accidentally declaring war, sir?" Morrison paused at the hatch leading to the bridge. "Well, Chen, 3 weeks ago I'd have said impossible. But then I watched you turn a routine equipment inspection into a philosophical discussion about the nature of artificial intelligence with a maintenance robot. In my defense, sir, MAINT-7 started it by asking if I thought it had a soul. The robot was malfunctioning, son. It was supposed to ask if you thought the air recycling system had a leak." Riley felt heat creep up his neck. That would explain why it seemed so existentially concerned about atmospheric pressure. Through the viewing port, Zerion Prime grew from a distant jewel to a world of impossible beauty, its 3 moons dancing in perfect synchronization while rings of crystalline debris caught and scattered the light of its binary suns. The orbital palace hung above it all like a dream made manifest, its flowing architecture suggesting that its builders had never encountered a right angle they couldn't improve upon. 60 seconds until docking, Captain Rodriguez announced. "All diplomatic personnel remember, we are guests here. Try not to touch anything that glows, hums, or asks you personal questions." Riley checked his dress uniform one final time, making sure every insignia was precisely placed and every wrinkle eliminated. He'd practiced the basic Valdorian greeting gesture until his wrists ached, memorized 17 different ways to politely decline food that might be sentient, and reviewed the cultural briefings until he could recite them backwards. What he hadn't prepared for was the possibility that none of it would matter, that some small action or casual word might change everything in ways no one could predict. But then again, that was the story of his life. The Grand Convergence Chamber made Riley's brain hurt in ways he hadn't known were possible. Not because it was ugly, quite the opposite. The space was so impossibly beautiful that his visual cortex kept filing complaints with his higher brain functions about having to process architecture that clearly violated several fundamental principles of how buildings were supposed to work. "Stop gawking, Chen," whispered Sergeant Torres from beside him. "You look like a tourist at his first antigrav mall." "I am a tourist at my first antigrav mall," Riley whispered back, watching as what appeared to be a small galaxy slowly rotated across the ceiling. "Except instead of buying overpriced coffee and novelty t-shirts, I'm trying not to accidentally cause humanity's first interstellar war by sneezing incorrectly." The human delegation had been arranged in what Ambassador Harrison had called optimal diplomatic formation, which seemed to mean that all the important people stood in front, while Riley and the other junior personnel formed what he privately thought of as the expendable backdrop. From his position near the back, he had an excellent view of everyone else's shoulders and occasional glimpses of the most significant first contact in human history. Queen Zephyra entered the chamber with all the fanfare that several centuries of interstellar civilization could provide, which was apparently quite a lot. The Valdorian honor guard didn't march so much as flow, their movements synchronized with a precision that suggested either extensive practice or a shared neural link. Riley was betting on the neural link, partly because it seemed more alien and mysterious, but mostly because he'd seen human honor guards practice, and it never looked that graceful. "Holy hell," breathed Lieutenant Kim from somewhere to his left. "Is that her?" Riley managed to peer between Colonel Morrison's shoulder and Ambassador Harrison's elaborate ceremonial hat to catch his first glimpse of Queen Zephyra. She was, he realized immediately, going to cause significant problems for his ability to think coherent thoughts. The Queen possessed what Riley's brain cataloged as dangerous beauty, the kind that had historically caused civilizations to collapse, poets to write terrible verses, and sensible people to make spectacularly poor decisions. Her features were delicate yet commanding, with high cheekbones that could probably cut glass and eyes that seemed to contain small supernovas. But it was her ears that marked her as unmistakably alien. Elegantly pointed and slightly elongated, they framed her face like living sculpture, adding an otherworldly grace to her already considerable presence. "Chen," Torres hissed, "you're staring." "I'm conducting diplomatic observation," Riley whispered back. "It's completely different and definitely professional." "You're drooling." Riley quickly checked. He wasn't drooling, but it had been a near thing. The formal presentations began with all the pomp and circumstance that humanity could muster, which was impressive considering they'd only had 300 years to practice interstellar diplomacy. Ambassador Harrison launched into what Riley recognized as speech number 3 from the diplomatic playbook: mutual cooperation and shared galactic prosperity, with optional subsections on cultural exchange and the brotherhood of sentient beings. Queen Zephyra listened with the kind of polite attention that Riley associated with people who were thinking about their grocery lists, while someone explained the rules of a sport they'd never play. Her court surrounded her like a living constellation, advisors and nobles whose pointed ears twitched occasionally in what Riley was beginning to suspect was the Valdorian equivalent of barely suppressed yawns. Furthermore, Ambassador Harrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of several advanced degrees in xenodiplomacy, humanity stands ready to contribute our unique perspectives to the greater galactic community, offering our diverse cultural heritage, our innovative problem-solving approaches, and our unwavering commitment to peaceful coexistence. One of the Valdorian courtiers leaned toward another and produced what sounded like wind chimes having a polite conversation. Riley's universal translator helpfully informed him that this roughly translated to "Do you think they know they're repeating themselves?" followed by a response that appeared to mean "SSH, it's rude to notice." Riley bit the inside of his cheek to keep from grinning. Apparently, political theater was universal. Queen Zephyra's responses came in that melodic Valdorian style that made every word sound like it was being sung by a particularly talented chorus. Her voice had the quality of silver bells mixed with distant thunder, and Riley found himself wondering if all Valdorians sounded like they were permanently auditioning for some cosmic opera. The hegemony acknowledges the enthusiasm of humanity's proposals, she said, the pause before enthusiasm containing enough diplomatic weight to sink a battleship. "We find your species' approach to galactic citizenship both unique and energetic." Riley's translator suggested that energetic might also mean chaotic, destructive, or like small children with access to antimatter. Context was apparently important. The ceremony continued with the traditional exchange of gifts, which went exactly as awkwardly as Riley had expected. The humans presented a collection of Earth artifacts that the Cultural Committee had spent 6 months selecting. Classical music, literature, art, and what Ambassador Harrison described as representative examples of human creativity and achievement. The Valdorians responded with a device that appeared to be carved from crystallized starlight and hummed softly when touched, which their spokesman explained was a harmonic resonance generator capable of translating emotional states into mathematical beauty. Riley wondered if anyone was going to mention that humans had also invented reality television, military-grade energy drinks, and a breakfast cereal that could survive atmospheric re-entry. Probably not. Then Queen Zephyra rose from her throne, and the entire chamber fell silent with a completeness that seemed to affect the laws of physics. Even the air molecules appeared to be holding their breath. As is traditional in such gatherings, she announced, her voice carrying easily through the vast space, the Crown will now select a representative from among our guests to serve as cultural liaison, that we might better understand each other through extended observation and exchange. Riley felt the tension in the human delegation ratchet up several notches. This was the moment everyone had been preparing for, the culmination of months of training and preparation. Ambassador Harrison straightened imperceptibly. Colonel Morrison's cybernetic eye whirred softly as it focused, and the various cultural attachés and scientific advisors arranged themselves in postures of dignified readiness. Queen Zephyra's luminous gaze swept across the assembled humans with the intensity of a stellar mapping survey, and Riley found himself holding his breath along with everyone else in the chamber. This was it, the moment that would determine humanity's future relationship with one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Her eyes moved past Ambassador Harrison, past Colonel Morrison, past the entire front row of humanity's finest diplomatic minds, and Riley began to relax. Soon this would be over. Some distinguished person would step forward to accept the honor of representing their species, and Riley could go back to his comfortable position in the background, where the most serious consequence of his actions was occasionally mopping the wrong corridor. Queen Zephyra's gaze reached the back of the human delegation and stopped. On him. Riley's first thought was that he must be blocking someone important's view. His second thought was that maybe there was a really impressive human standing directly behind him. His third thought, which arrived with all the subtlety of a hyperspace collision, was that Queen Zephyra was looking at him with the focused attention of someone who had just made a very important decision. "Oh no," he whispered. Queen Zephyra's finger extended toward Riley with the kind of deliberate precision typically reserved for targeting systems on interstellar dreadnoughts. The gesture seemed to stretch across several geological epochs, giving Riley plenty of time to contemplate every poor life choice that had led him to this moment. "That human will be mine," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority and what Riley's increasingly panicked brain interpreted as the sound of his military career being fed through a matter disintegrator. The silence that followed was so profound that Riley could hear his own heartbeat attempting to achieve faster-than-light velocity. Somewhere in the vast chamber, a piece of Valdorian technology hummed softly, which under normal circumstances might have been soothing, but now sounded suspiciously like the universe laughing at him. Ambassador Harrison's face cycled through approximately 17 different expressions before settling on what Riley recognized as diplomatic crisis mode. Colonel Morrison's cybernetic eye whirred audibly as it recalibrated, probably running threat assessments and calculating the exact percentage chance that Riley had just doomed humanity to galactic war. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Harrison began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone diffusing a bomb made of pure politics. "Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding regarding—" "No misunderstanding," Queen Zephyra interrupted, her gaze still fixed on Riley with the intensity of a stellar cartographer mapping a new nebula. "The selection is clear, that one." She pointed again, in case anyone had missed it the first time. Riley raised his hand tentatively, like a student asking permission to use the bathroom during a lecture on quantum mechanics. Your Majesty, I think there might be some confusion. You are the one I have chosen," she said, and Riley noticed that her pointed ears had tilted slightly forward, giving her an expression of curious interest that somehow made everything worse. "Is this not acceptable?" The Valdorian court erupted into what sounded like a symphony of wind chimes having an animated discussion. Riley's translator helpfully provided a running commentary that included phrases like unprecedented selection criteria, fascinating deviation from protocol, and what appeared to be the Valdorian equivalent of, "Well, this should be interesting." "It's not that it's unacceptable, Your Majesty," Riley said, wondering if there was a diplomatic way to explain that he was possibly the least qualified human in the galaxy for whatever this was. "It's just that I'm not really. I mean, I don't have any. What I'm trying to say is—" "You are concerned about your qualifications," Queen Zephyra observed, and Riley caught what might have been amusement flickering in her stellar eyes. "Tell me, young human, what do you believe qualifies one for cultural exchange?" Riley glanced desperately at Ambassador Harrison, who was making subtle hand gestures that either meant play along or prepare for immediate evacuation, depending on your interpretation of human body language. "Well," Riley said, his brain apparently deciding that honesty was the best policy in situations involving alien queens and potential interstellar incidents, "I suppose extensive education in xenocultural studies, advanced diplomatic training, fluency in multiple languages, and the kind of refined social skills that don't involve accidentally insulting entire civilizations over breakfast." The Queen's ears twitched in what Riley was beginning to suspect was the Valdorian version of raised eyebrows. "And you possess none of these qualifications?" "None whatsoever, Your Majesty. I can barely manage regular cultural exchanges with other humans. Last month I somehow offended my roommate by asking if his houseplant was supposed to be that color, and it turned out the plant was fine, but my roommate was colorblind and had been watering it with coffee for 3 weeks, thinking it was some exotic fertilizer." Several members of the Valdorian court produced those musical chittering sounds that Riley was learning to interpret as suppressed laughter. Queen Zephyra's expression shifted to something that might have been delighted surprise. "You speak of your limitations with remarkable candor," she said. "This is unusual in diplomatic exchanges." "Your Majesty," Colonel Morrison interjected, his voice carrying the measured tones of someone trying to salvage a situation that had gone completely off the rails, "Private Chen is indeed an exemplary representative of human authenticity. However, perhaps someone with more formal experience might better serve." "No," Queen Zephyra said, and the single word carried enough finality to stop a charging asteroid. "The selection stands. This one possesses something rare among those who seek to impress us with their credentials and careful words." Riley felt compelled to ask, "What's that, Your Majesty?" "Honesty," she replied, and her smile revealed teeth that were perfectly human except for canines that were just slightly too sharp. "You do not seek to manipulate or deceive. You do not calculate your words for maximum political advantage. You simply are." "That's one way to put it," Riley said. "My drill sergeant had several other ways, most of which involved questioning my parentage and suggesting I'd been assembled from spare parts by a committee of drunken engineers." This time the Valdorian laughter was audible, a sound like crystal bells being played by a gentle breeze. Even Queen Zephyra's lips curved upward in what Riley realized was probably the first genuine smile of the entire diplomatic ceremony. "Your drill sergeant sounds like a being of considerable wisdom," she said. "Very well. Do you accept the position of cultural liaison to the Valdorian court?" Riley looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of the human delegation. Ambassador Harrison wore the expression of someone watching a carefully constructed house of cards being demolished by an enthusiastic toddler. Colonel Morrison looked like he was running combat scenarios in his head. The other junior personnel stared at him with a mixture of awe, terror, and what might have been relief that it wasn't them. "Your Majesty," Riley said, "can I ask what exactly this position involves? Because if it requires me to navigate complex political situations, represent humanity in important negotiations, or generally act like I know what I'm doing, I feel obligated to point out that you might be making a terrible mistake." Queen Zephyra stood from her throne, and Riley noticed that she moved with the kind of fluid grace that suggested either extensive training in combat arts or a fundamental understanding of physics that most beings never achieved. "The position," she said, stepping down from the dais with movements that seemed to defy several laws of motion, "involves being yourself. Nothing more, nothing less." "That's it. That is everything." She stopped directly in front of him, and Riley realized that her eyes weren't just luminous. They actually contained tiny points of light that moved like distant stars. "You will live at court, participate in our daily activities, ask your questions, and allow us to observe how humans truly think and feel when they are not performing for diplomatic cameras." Riley considered this. "So essentially, I'm going to be a zoo exhibit, but with better accommodations and probably less people throwing food at me." "Do humans typically throw food at zoo exhibits?" "Not typically, no. Although my little brother did once launch mashed potatoes at me during a family dinner, but that was more about sibling rivalry than scientific observation." Queen Zephyra's ears tilted forward again, and Riley was beginning to recognize this as her expression of genuine curiosity. "You have a sibling. This is a biological relationship involving shared genetic material." "Yes, Your Majesty. Jimmy's 3 years younger, considerably smarter, and has never accidentally joined the military because he thought the recruitment poster was advertising a career fair." "You joined your military by accident." Riley felt heat creep up his neck. "It's a longer story than you might expect, involving a misunderstanding about free food, a very persuasive recruiter, and my apparently complete inability to read fine print." The Queen turned to address her court, speaking in rapid Valdorian that Riley's translator rendered as something about unprecedented anthropological opportunities and fascinating behavioral patterns. Then she turned back to him. "The selection is final," she announced. "You will remain here as our guest and cultural liaison. Your delegation may complete their visit and return to inform your government of these arrangements." Ambassador Harrison stepped forward. "Your Majesty, while we're honored by your interest in Private Chen, perhaps we should discuss the specific terms and duration of this arrangement." "Terms?" Queen Zephyra looked genuinely puzzled. "He will be treated as an honored guest of the crown. As for duration—" She paused, her stellar gaze fixing on Riley again, "until such time as the exchange has served its purpose." Riley raised his hand again. "Just to clarify, Your Majesty, when you say, 'until the exchange has served its purpose,' you're not talking about something that might take, say, several decades. Because I was sort of planning to finish college eventually, and my student loans aren't going to pay themselves." Queen Zephyra's smile widened, revealing more of those slightly too sharp teeth. "Time, young human, is a more flexible concept than your species typically recognizes, but do not concern yourself with such matters. The universe has a way of arranging things according to its own mysterious purposes." Riley wasn't entirely sure he liked the sound of that, but given that he was apparently now the property of an alien queen who could probably rearrange his molecular structure with a thought, he figured his opinion on cosmic scheduling was probably not a priority. 3 weeks into what Riley had started calling his accidental diplomatic career, he'd learned several important facts about Valdorian palace life. First, The walls actually did adjust their color based on the emotional state of their occupants, which explained why his quarters had been various shades of panic green for the first few days. Second, Valdorian cuisine was surprisingly delicious, once you got past the fact that some of it glowed softly and occasionally hummed show tunes. Third, Queen Zephyra possessed what could only be described as a dangerous level of curiosity about human behavior. "Explain to me again," she said, settling gracefully onto the crystalline bench in her private garden while Riley attempted to master the art of Valdorian meditation. "Why humans find it necessary to make noise when they are thinking." Riley opened one eye and realized he'd been muttering under his breath again. "It's not intentional, Your Majesty. It's just that when I'm concentrating, my brain sometimes needs to hear itself work. Kind of like how some people need background music, except instead of music, it's me talking myself through basic mental processes." The Queen's pointed ears tilted forward in that expression he'd learned, meant she was filing away another piece of fascinating human data. Over the past weeks, she'd collected his observations on everything from human sleeping patterns to his theories about why people insisted on putting pineapple on pizza, a concept that had required 3 separate explanations and a hastily drawn diagram. "Your species' cognitive processes are remarkably externalized," she mused, watching as he gave up on meditation and flopped backward onto the garden's luminescent grass. "Most beings process thought internally. Most beings probably don't have to worry about their thoughts getting lost on the way from their brain to their mouth," Riley replied, noting that the sky above them was currently displaying what looked like a live aurora that spelled out poetry in languages he couldn't read. "I've found that if I don't say things out loud, there's a significant chance they'll just wander off, and I'll find them 3 days later trying to make friends with my subconscious." Queen Zephyra laughed, a sound like silver wind chimes caught in a summer breeze. Riley had discovered that making her laugh was both surprisingly easy and oddly addictive. For someone who ruled half the galaxy, she seemed genuinely delighted by the most mundane aspects of human existence. "I have received word from your Ambassador Harrison," she said, producing a communication device that looked like a soap bubble filled with lightning. "Your government is concerned about the indefinite nature of your stay here." Riley sat up, brushing luminescent grass from his hair. "They probably think you're holding me hostage for political leverage, which, to be fair, would be a reasonable assumption given that I'm essentially a very confused prisoner with excellent accommodations and surprisingly good health benefits." "Are you a prisoner?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that made Riley look at her more carefully. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Am I?" Queen Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, her stellar gaze focused on the floating gardens that drifted lazily through the air above them. "When I selected you," she said finally, "my advisors were perplexed. They expected me to choose someone with impressive credentials, advanced knowledge, political significance. Instead, you got the human equivalent of a malfunctioning maintenance robot," Riley said. "I can understand their confusion." "You are not malfunctioning," she said, and there was something almost fierce in her voice. "You are authentic. Do you know how rare that is among beings who have achieved interstellar civilization? Most species, by the time they reach the stars, have learned to hide their true selves behind layers of protocol and political calculation. They show us what they think we want to see." Riley considered this. "And I show you what I actually am, which is apparently a cosmic accident held together by caffeine and stubborn determination." "You show me hope," she said quietly, and Riley felt something shift in the atmosphere around them, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "My people have grown, isolated. We have achieved such technological mastery that we have forgotten how to simply exist, how to find joy in small things, how to laugh at our own mistakes." "Your Majesty," Riley said, feeling like he was approaching something important and fragile, "are you telling me that I've been selected for advanced diplomatic duty because I'm basically a walking reminder that it's okay to be imperfect. Queen Zephyra turned to look at him directly, and Riley saw something in her ancient, star-filled eyes that looked almost like loneliness. You have taught my court more about the value of authenticity in 3 weeks than centuries of formal diplomatic exchanges. Your questions, your observations, your willingness to admit ignorance, these things have reminded us of what we have lost in our pursuit of perfection. Riley felt a sudden weight of responsibility that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. So what happens now? Do I stay here forever, being professionally imperfect for the entertainment and education of your court? That, Queen Zephyra said, standing and extending her hand to him, is your choice. You are not my prisoner, Riley Chen. You are my teacher, my friend, and if you choose to stay, my permanent cultural liaison. But if you wish to return to your studies, your family, your accidentally chosen military career, you may do so with our blessing and our gratitude. Riley took her hand, noting that her skin was warm and somehow seemed to contain its own subtle luminescence. As she pulled him to his feet, he realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, he'd stopped being the terrified college student who'd stumbled into this situation and become someone who could stand in an alien garden and have a conversation about the nature of authenticity with a being who could reshape matter with her thoughts. Can I ask you something, Your Majesty? Always. Why did you really choose me? Not the diplomatic answer about authenticity and cultural exchange. The real reason. Queen Zephyra's smile was soft and slightly sad. Because when you looked at me in that throne room, you didn't see a queen or a political opportunity or a being to be feared and appeased. You saw someone who might be as confused and uncertain as you were, and your first instinct was honesty rather than strategy. Riley thought about this as they walked through the garden, past flowers that sang in harmonious whispers and trees that bore fruit made of crystallized starlight. The human delegation had departed 2 days ago, taking with them promises of continued diplomatic contact and a message from Riley to his parents that essentially boiled down to still alive, having strange adventures. We'll explain later. I need to stay, he said finally, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. Not forever, maybe, but for now, I think I'm actually learning something important here. What are you learning? Riley paused beside a fountain that flowed upward instead of down, watching the water dance through impossible spirals before returning to its source. That being scared and confused doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Sometimes it just means you're doing something worth doing. Queen Zephyra's ears tilted forward in that expression of delighted interest. And what else? That the universe has a really strange sense of humor, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Riley grinned at her, feeling more certain than he had about anything in his entire life. After all, it did somehow manage to turn a kid who joined the military because he thought they were offering free lunch into humanity's first interstellar cultural ambassador. The universe, Queen Zephyra said, her laughter echoing through the impossible garden, is full of beautiful accidents. As they walked back toward the palace, Riley caught sight of his reflection in the polished crystal walls and realized he looked different somehow. Not older exactly, but more present, more settled in his own skin. He was still the same person who'd stumbled through hyperspace 3 weeks ago, but now he knew that being yourself wasn't a limitation to overcome. Sometimes, it was exactly what the universe needed.